Hello, I'm Justin Hill, prize-winning author and creator of Worlds of Words. And this year for Advent, as I'm approaching 20 novels published, I thought it'd be interesting to go back and look through 12 of the ones that were kind of seminal or had something to do with my advancement as a writer, or even something that's kind of interesting to talk about. Yesterday I was talking about my first book, which I wrote when I was 23, and was I have sneeringly called it kind of publishing your teenage diaries. It wasn't that, obviously. But one of the things that kind of troubled me in the writing process was my editor kept saying, we want more of you in this story. And I was like, I'm the least interesting person in this story. I think the kind of the local Chinese, the community I'm living with, are much more interesting, and their stories are much more interesting, and I'd rather have the characters tell their stories. And so the kind of the book I didn't really feel was the one I wanted to write, and she probably didn't think it was the one she wanted to publish. Anyway, came to my next book, and today's choice is Ciao Asmara. Now, this was the next book I wrote, but it wasn't published for a number of years, and it wasn't published partly, and this was a lesson in publishing. My first book was about China, which was starting to become trendy. Films like Raise the Red Lantern were coming out, and people were interested in China. Eritrea, no one has been interested in Eritrea, perhaps for Eritrea's entire history. The story of Eritrea in brief, and this was where, so I was working with VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas. I did 2.5 years in China, and then I went to Eritrea and did 2 years work there. And they'd had a 30-year war of independence from Ethiopia. A third of the population had grown up in refugee camps in Sudan. Education in their native language had been banned under the Ethiopian regimes. And so once Eritrea got its independence from the longest war of the 20th century, all tied up with a famine and all that kind of stuff, there was a huge backlog of people who needed education. And so VSO was helping to cover that. I was one of the team in Eritrea's second city, Keren, teaching English to 6th and 7th graders. I haven't even got onto the book yet. And so there was so much in Eritrea's story that I wanted to tell because it seemed kind of so important. But Eritrea being Eritrea, no one was particularly interested. And so this book languished. And this book kind of, I taught myself to write. Having published, my teenage diaries, I was like, okay, this is going to be kind of literature, which is what I want to write. And so I set out quite determinedly to write a brilliant book, and I thought this was brilliant, and no one was interested. My editor had left the publishing house. The new editor wasn't interested. No one was interested in Eritrea, and so I had been published at 25. Ticked my life's ambition, and then my next book I was unpublished, and so that was a weird and odd and a little depressing place to be. And I knew this was a much better book, and it went on to be published, and maybe that's the next book's story, but I will jump forward a little bit. I came back to this about 3 years later, and it was a bank holiday weekend, and I just printed it out, and I cut through the manuscript. I cut it in half. I got rid of everything that wasn't, I thought brilliant, and sent off, and it got published, and it got shortlisted for the Thomas Cook Travel Book Award. So fantastic. So that was a great kind of reward for sticking by that book. Anyway, and the book that made it all happen, I'll be talking about in the next issue of this Advent story.